Having such a long history and tracing its origins from Kyiv Rus, Ukraine, like any other European country, should have a museum at every turn. But the first institutions to exhibit historical and cultural values to the general public in Ukraine only appeared in the late 19th century. And just a few people made it possible. One of them was Bohdan Khanenko, who came from a glorious hetman family. He built a career as a court officer of the Russian Empire, which controlled Ukrainian lands back then. At the same time, Khanenko was a passionate collector of art and archaeological artifacts from around the world. His wife, Varvara Tereshchenko, was descended from the family of Ukrainian industrial patrons. In conditions when all the conquered peoples of the Russian Empire were denied their own history, culture, and general education, it was only through the efforts of several influential families and scientists that it became possible to unveil the Kyiv City Museum in 1899. Officially, it was named after Emperor Nicholas II, and its exposition told nothing about Ukrainian history or culture, but this was a turning point. In subsequent years, the Kyiv Society of Antiquities and Arts, which included patrons Khanenko, Tereshchenko, and Symyrenko, opened the Museum of Antiquities and Arts, where a significant part of Ukrainian exhibits was on show. But the cultural policy of tsarist times was nothing compared to the totalitarian unification of the Soviet period, especially in the second half of the 20th century. It was the time in Ukraine when one particular artist, whose contribution to the national museums was priceless, began to work. I'm a muralist by profession, but monumental art is associated with architecture. It so happened that I became a museum artist. I'm involved in painting large objects of a national, even international scale. Anatoly Haidamaka set himself a goal, as far as possible, of saving real Ukrainian history from Soviet myths and preserving it for the future. All this took place under the ideological censorship that inspected every exposition. For example, to open the Museum of Zaporizhian Cossacks, we had to show the construction of the Dnipro hydroelectric power plant, although it has nothing to do with Cossacks. But this helped us show that period. How Anatoly Haidamaka discovered his own style, which allowed him to create in the era of social realism. Why is it so important to avoid imposing a certain point of view at an exhibition? UATV tells the story of the unique master of historical memory who created exhibits and memorials dedicated to Chernobyl, the Holodomor, and the Holocaust. In fact, the formal approach of Soviet censorship pushed Anatoly Haidamaka to create his own figurative language, which hid meanings to the public eye. These Aesopian techniques survived their ideology, and after some successful museum projects in the USSR, the artist could hone his style in independent Ukraine. Anatoly Haidamaka talks about how it is done, especially for UATV. The National Museum of Chernobyl in Kyiv holds dozens of tours every day. The eponymous American miniseries of 2019 by screenwriter Craig Mazin and director Joan Renck, who both documented and emotionally told the world about the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and its consequences, had fueled great interest in it. But long before filming began, back in 1992, Anatoly Haidamaka used even bolder imaginative techniques to create this exhibition. On entering, visitors are greeted by the Chernobyl Road. On top, there are names of the villages that became part of the exclusion zone. Therefore, we follow the tragic path through a dry fell tree, with apples rolling along the road. When autumn came, I witnessed such a picture in the zone. This is the last road to Chernobyl. In the center, there's the banner taken from a church in the Chernobyl zone. Unfortunately, this church is burned down and all the remains is stored in this museum. At the entrance to the main hall, there's a real iconostasis from one of those churches. There is a radiation danger sign on its gates and a liquidator's suit on the place of the Archangel Michael. Immediately behind the symbolic composition, there's the reactor cover of Unit 4. This was done so that people have an idea of what it looks like. Here it is life-size, and in those materials in which it really was. Two angels leaned over me. One is black, the other white. The forces of good and evil. It was the dark forces of that period in the Soviet Union which brought Chernobyl and nuclear energy to such a poor condition. On the one hand, there are white embroidered towels symbolizing the people. On the other, documentary pictures from Soviet officialdom, which at first denied the seriousness of the accident. Black and white converges over the font. This is the place in the church for the baptism of children. A new life was born here. It is a symbolic node and the center of the Chernobyl Museum. This bow, taken from the zone, contains children's toys. Here children can bring toys and leave toys in memory of those children who died due to the disaster. Here below, under Noak's Ark, there is such a black hole that expresses an abyss in the culture and the national tradition of Polisia and the whole of Ukraine. The children's theme is everywhere. Hexagonal panels with the shape of the reactor cover have hundreds of pictures of children who studied in Pripyat and had to leave their homes forever. On separate shelves you can read their letters. Anatoly Haidamaka tries to frame all the documents. This composition symbolizes a family tree that passes through an empty, unfortunately, baby cradle. These pictures on the floor are like fallen leaves from the apple tree, which will no longer bear fruit. And this is a scattered family album. All houses left by people looked at that time like this. When I went to these houses, I saw that letters, pictures were scattered there, so I decided to bring them here. Anatoly Haidamaka follows the principles of non-linearity and ambiguity. This exposition doesn't have a specific order. You can enjoy it walking around the exhibits, and a guide is not needed to understand what the museum is talking about. The museum should have its image, and my task is to help person understand what I wanted to convey, to help person understand without words. That's why I used two angels, black and white, and the font there. And then you should guess, because each person can interpret it in his or her own way. That is, it is the polar opposite of standard museums from the Soviet era, which a visitor's thought flow should follow ideology strictly and not leave the present day. Modern museums are built on immersion of the era and on dialogue, and Anatoly Haidamaka was in fact the pioneer of this method in Ukraine. Experts in this field are still interested in the experience he has. Graduates of the Seoul Academy of Arts visited the Chernobyl Museum recently. They asked me to hold a workshop for them. It was just a meeting. They came from Seoul, covered such a great distance to learn from me how to organize museums. Another museum that Anatoly would have never created in the USSR is dedicated to the Holodomor. It was an artificial famine organized by Soviet leaders on Ukrainian lands and headed by Joseph Stalin in the early 1930s. About 20 UN member states have already recognized the Holodomor as genocide of the Ukrainian people. Anatoly Haidamaka designed the project of a monument, candle and exposition inside it. The 10 million people who were destroyed, well, this really was a huge figure. This is incomprehensible. It's possible to write the slogan 10 million. But when you see the cruciform vessel that is filled with 10 million grains, what else can we add to that? Back in the mid-2000s, Several Israeli philanthropists asked Anatoly to design a new memorial composition at the site another tragedy, Babin Yar. Here the Third Reich, which invaded Ukraine in 1941, staged mass executions of Kyiv's Jews. People were ordered to collect their valuables and arrive in the northwestern area of Kyiv. It was very scary to watch how a convoy guard took this suitcase and shakes out the person's entire life, which was packed into that suitcase. A person's entire life was simply thrown out onto a large pile and it turned into garbage. The people were then shot and dumped into the ditch. Anatoly Haidamaka reasoned that depicting the execution itself in sculptures was too obvious a decision, which would not cause the proper emotional response. Instead, the artist wanted to show the tragedy through the belongings of the executed people. I propose to put these belongings sculpted out of stone onto the road. Sculptures of these suitcases and belongings that people took with them on their final journey. It was the tragic road of victims who faced death. On one side there should be tombstones that were removed from, filled ditches where they'd been for 70 years. Now they are being taken out and installed along this road. Anatoly Haidamaka also wants to pave stones brought from all cities which saw the Holocaust. Under the project, the road meets a wall of suitcases. There will be an entrance to the room, with a glass floor through which a ravine is visible. From above, the light gradually disappears and we move to the underground museum. There are no exhibits, just a mood. Perhaps mirrors inside reflect those people who come, and each person is reflected several times in black mirrors. And you will feel one of them, you will feel the path that people went through.
Себе відчуєш, щоб ти відчув оту дорогу, яку пройшли люди.
You could have been there too. And then we go out into the park, because life continues all the same. The Public Committee for Perpetuating the Memory of the Victims of Babin Yar approved Anatoly Haidamaka's project, but disagreements with the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine regarding other objects at the memorial complex are impeding the implementation of his project. The artist hopes for decisive progress and the start of construction in 2019. He wants to follow the road, which he so vividly imagined.
Мене так мистецтвознавці називають мій образ мислення poetic symbolism.
Art critics describe my way of thinking as a poetic symbolism. I somewhere agree with such an interpretation. The memorial may be large, but it should have an image to make a person feel that he or she has never seen this anywhere else.